This is the Yacht Business Podcast, and I'm your host, David Fuller. In this episode, we talk to a software entrepreneur mixing wearables with water sports. Thanks for joining me for another edition of the Yacht Business Podcast, where we take a look at the commercial side of the marine sector and the water sport industry. In this episode, I am joined by Gabriela Hernandez, who is co-founder and CMO of Kanara Sport Tech. Kanara is an app which is designed to help kite surfers and paddleboarders and sailors keep track of their data and share their sport with others. So welcome, Gabriela. Thank you for joining me. Why don't you start with a little bit about yourself? I noticed on one of your profiles it said that you were a lawyer. So how did you get into the sailing app business?
Well, first of all, I'll just say thank you for inviting us. My name is Gabby Hernandez. I'm originally from the Cayman Islands, so naturally grew up on the water. I did study law and policy. I did not go on to become like a barrister or a solicitor because I very quickly realized that I did not enjoy the law that much and didn't want to pursue that career. So I had worked in the financial services industry. I had also had been involved in quite a bit of technical projects in terms of the company that I had worked for. I was also very much involved with a lot of, especially marine related issues. So it's always been something that's very close to me, the marine environment. And I wanted to start working more so in the aspect of sustainability. So I ended up going to the UK, where I started working for Sustainable Ventures and doing the communications and so on for the sustainable workspaces. And it really was the first kind of environment going from Cayman to London, where there's a lot more of a tech scene. There's a lot more focus on innovation and finding different solutions and so on. So it definitely gave me that exposure. Then when I had met my co-founder, he's a kiteboarder. He had actually come to me with this idea about doing a device that would be able to help track his kite sessions, that he'd be able to share them with his friends, that he'd be able to, compete with other kiters. And I thought it was a really interesting idea. Immediately I saw this doesn't have to be just like kiteboarding. This could be with, for example, I do paddle. Obviously sailing is a big sport. You have lots of new modalities coming up, such as wing foil. We have over 150 different types of sports that we're tracking. So for us, we really were just really excited by this idea of being able to, connect people that have these shared interests and being able to provide solutions that they would be able to interact and engage with one another in the way that we were thinking. So that was really more so the core of the idea, and some little background for myself and my co-founder, Ale. And then that's how we started. We started developing. So as I mentioned, it was initially at this idea for the hardware, a certain type of device. And one of the things that we quickly realized is that, there are a number of hardware solutions and so on. And each of them have their benefits and they're great, but there are also many limitations in terms of the accuracy, the reliability. They're also oftentimes really expensive. And limited in terms of the connectivity. Say, for example, this device is very difficult to then interact with this person. I really was thinking, well, how about we focus more so on the software side and the data side? We've come a long way in terms of connectivity. And one of the things was that we really wanted to focus on there is already the hardware and the devices and equipment out there. How best can we leverage the technology in terms of being able to connect that and utilize the information that we're able to harness from these devices, as well as from the environment and so on, to be able to produce data that is valuable. So, as you said, focusing more so on the athletes initially.
Yeah, I guess that's always been one of the downsides of sailing, is that it's a niche sport, and therefore some of the other apps that are developed for running or developed for football or developed for some of these other sports that are played by millions and millions of people don't exactly get the little details that somebody who's on a kiteboard or on a sailboat wants, in terms of, what was the wind doing, or what was the current doing, or what were my competitors thinking at the same time. And obviously on the one hand you've got multi-million-dollar solutions developed by the America's Cup in order to create graphic overlays and some awesome data that's coming out of SailGP. I was down at SailGP a couple of weeks ago in Dubai, and they've got an entire container full of Oracle Cloud equipment, which is giving the teams real-time information off the boats from like 100 sensors. Or from a consumer point of view, or somebody who's out racing around the cans or going for a 30-minute kite surf, it's been missing from those sort of Strava apps and other apps. Whenever I went paddleboarding, Strava always thought I was walking, but I was on the sea. So
that's actually it. We really like apps, and one of our biggest inspirations were apps like Strava. If, say, for example, one of our initial issues, it sounds really minor, but it was I'm going for a paddle session, and I come out of the water, I forget to turn off my watch or stop, recording. And at the end of the day, even if I'm trying to, I don't mind it being called walking, for example, but even if I'm trying to compare with someone else, it's not really accurate. There's especially depending on, you're in a completely different environment. The signal also we need to be taken account for, right? It's not built for the environment or the use. So we're just like, how can we make something that is as easy and simple to use as a Strava, but particularly for sailors and water sports athletes. All right, we know it's a niche community, but I mean, looking at the numbers, the interest is growing, especially amongst the younger generation. As we mentioned, we first started in kiting, for example, where you can see a huge number of really young athletes competing at a very high professional level. And in terms of onboarding, say, for example, introducing this kind of technology to the younger athletes and so on, it's really easy for them to understand that they can play, they can compete, they can practice with one another, and just have a log of their stories, and also just shareable material. Now that we live in this digital age where a lot of our social interactions are online.
Yeah, I remember taking my phone on sailing on big boats, on keel boats, and that's one thing. You can stick the phone downstairs and it's fine. Keeping it dry in a paddleboarding session is not something that everyone has had access to. So I guess things like wearables has changed the game a little bit there. So tell me a little bit about that. What are some of the changes in the technology that's happened that has enabled this app to be able to be delivered the way you're delivering it?
I think that really we're benefiting from just like the change of times, right? Nowadays, everyone more or less has a smartphone. A few years ago, the idea of using, say, for example, smartwatches and so on wasn't as common as it is now. And I really think that's because now there's so many options, as well as there's an option for basically any budget, which then makes this technology way more accessible to people. And I think, as you were mentioning before, you have the America's Cup, you have SailGP that are doing great things, and as well as, say, for example, the ocean race and so on, that are doing amazing things in terms of trying to leverage new technologies for these major events to try and help bring the action to the community, right? However, it's the utilization of these technologies, right, for the tracking and the sharing and visualization of these activities is still very much reserved to a high tier. We're talking like the best of the best events. So what we're really trying to do is being able to also like leverage the accessible technologies that are available to the regular average day sailor or rider to be able to track and share their sessions. Right now, we're just doing the being able to record and analyze your sessions, be able to compete in the rankings. Sometimes we organize some kind of events, right, where we'll say, oh, this is a top speed challenge or a top distance challenge, to enable the athletes to be able to interact with one another, as well as they have the option of creating someone like match style races between each other, right?
Right.
In the future, one of the things that we're looking at doing is, and that we've been working on behind the scenes, we've been testing it, and we plan on releasing this in the new year, is actually just like a 360 revisualization of these sessions, like in 3D, that people will be able to interact with their sessions, look at it, but then also create those shareable clips of their activities that they can easily share online. And then the obvious evolution after that is then the revisualization of races and regattas. Is it live tracking? Not to be honest, right now, no. The live tracking is still pretty, is something that's still being worked on. And I think there are a number of players, I'm sure that you're aware of, that are trying to implement this.
It's also a different audience, isn't it? A different user case, because if you're out there on the water, you don't need to see that data in real time, unless you're in a coach situation or you're in a semi-professional. Yeah, like I say, if you've got a coach or you're doing a training session or you're doing a camp or something, then maybe that information could be useful in real time to a coach. But I can't see. I mean, I couldn't care less whether or not I knew how fast I was going at that particular time. I quite happily go back and look at the file later and see and analyze it. Yeah, the real time thing is probably less of a thing, but it could also, I guess, be really useful from a protest point of view. But we'll maybe get to that in a bit. I'm just thinking back not that far long ago. I had a Samsung version 2 Gear 2 watch, and I don't think even that had GPS. It had Bluetooth connectivity, it had Wi-Fi, so that wouldn't work out in the water. And I'm pretty sure it didn't have GPS either. So even in one generation of the wearables, it's moved on fairly significantly.
Exactly, and this is one of the things that we're noticing, where for example, just a few years ago, the idea of, say, Apple Watch being taken into the water would have been crazy. But now you'd be surprised. That's one of the next integrations that we're going to be putting in. How many people are ready for it? Because now they've reached up to a standard that they can feel a bit more, they can withstand more damage. But also one of the things that we've definitely been looking at, because sure, for the athletes, right now our tool is perfect for them just having a debrief of their session. However, going forward, we've done some tests in with the Formula Kite Spain series in doing a complimentary event. And one of the things that we definitely saw would be interesting is trying to bring that action online. So I was actually listening to your chat with James Pleasance before. And when he was talking about you asked about the local fans, right? Like, are there most of the fans local, or are they traveling, many people flying in to come and see? And it's true, many of these events, they are great opportunities for tourism and fan engagement and so on, but we're not at that stage as of yet. That's not to say that there is not the interest for people to be able to watch these events online, to have them more accessible, because there are a number of events that are being organized around the world, right? Sure. We're a startup, we're still in early days and so on. And so many of our athletes, ones are based in Spain. Yeah. At least we've still been able to meet quite a few athletes from, say, France or Germany, the US and the UK and so on. And the stories that they have are really inspiring, to see. And the work that they put in is also impressive. It's really, really cool.
So what's the business model? How do you make money?
So the business model, we have 3 verticals. So one, we have the application, which right now is free. However, we will be doing a freemium model on that. So for example, advanced statistics, advanced features, being able to have a bit more options in terms of interacting with other users or taking part in organizing events and so on via the platform. Those will all be free. We also, secondly, have just in the last month finalized our tool for coaches, clubs, and teams.
Okay.
When we released the app, we have quite a few coaches and high-level athletes that came to us, and they were like, "This would be amazing. Would it be possible to have certain tools or complementary additions onto the application that would enable them to simplify the management of activities of their athletes, as well as the activities? So whether that be training or competition, get an oversight of the athlete's performance afterwards, being able to compare stats between your athletes and so on. And in the future, what we're going to be implementing is reporting. All right. Reporting is something that's really, really important, for example, in determining which athletes get certain sponsorships and so on and so forth, so that they can accelerate in their career. Also, in terms of their being able to track, participation within the clubs, those kind of things. And then lastly, what it is working with brands as well as event organizers in terms of hosting sponsored events, whether that be in terms of via our platform or integrated kind of campaigns that are complementary in terms of social media campaigns or offline kind of events, but providing a kind of more interactive experience via the platform.
Right. That makes sense. Is it capturing biometric data as well?
Yes, some of the we only recently introduced some of the heart rate data, which was very interesting for a number of the coaches and the high-level athletes that we have. And our idea is that in the future, we're going to be refining the kind of the data and so on that we're providing based on the user feedback, But the heart rate is the initial one that we've put in for now.
Sailing, sometimes sailing clubs can be quite old school. What sort of barriers have you come up against, or objections have you come up against have you come up against any objections from the sailing community or the clubs?
Yeah, I mean, as with everything, some people are generally pretty comfortable with how they've done things. I think that's one of the reasons why the sailing and water sports industry has lagged behind other sports in terms of digitalization. However, I think that's really changing. Once we've actually gone and they sit down with the coaches and the sports directors and so on, and we show them the platform and walk them through, they love it, and they see that like this will be able to save time as well as money in terms of being able to managing the clubs and doing different tasks, right? However, there is a learning curve. Once you're being to implement new tools or new methods and so on, it does take some time. It takes some onboarding. It takes some use and making sure for the people to adapt it into their routine, especially if people have been doing things in a certain way for a longer period of time. And that's fine. The things take time. And one of the things that we're trying to focus on is making sure that we're taking all the feedback, that we're able to take the feedback on from the clubs and the coaches and athletes that we're working with to improve the platform, and so that they are deriving the value. We're not just saying that here we have something, it's great, use it. No, that they themselves begin to use it because it is providing them those intended benefits.
Well, if there's one thing that sailors and water sports people love doing is talking about the race over and over and over again. So I guess if you've got stats and tracks and things like that, you can sort of have endless conversations in the bar afterwards about what really went on. And I said, I guess you could also perhaps use it in, protests or something like that in terms of, I'm thinking more of the sailing side of things rather than the other side of things, but in competitive environments, if you could use the tracking and it was accurate enough, you could see, where someone tacked or where someone was in the right or someone might have been in the wrong in that sort of situation as well.
That would be amazing. But we definitely will take time to get there. I think still in quite a few modalities, especially a number of different classes, they don't even allow tracking, right?
Right.
And say, for example, I traditionally come from more like paddle surfing, so I'm a sailor. Not every rider or someone feels that they need to be tracked, for example. There are still many people as well that are like, I want to just go out on the water and forget my phone. I don't, you know what I mean? I don't want to be necessarily competitive or comparing my stats with anybody else. And that's perfectly fine too. At the end of the day, it's just we want to be able to provide stats that are interesting, that will be, if it's just for personal use, the application, you can track, analyze your sessions, track your progress over time, have a log of your activity, try and keep motivated. But also, if you're looking for more the social element, being able to add your friends, create one-on-one challenges with them, right? Whether you're in Dubai, for example, or in Spain, just being able to go out and enjoy your time, upload your sessions, and then be able to have a quick overview of those. Like, as we develop over time, we'd definitely be able to compound upon those, ideally compound upon them. So these capabilities, so that they as much simulate the kind of real world interactions that we have, as people involved in these sports, being able to just go out and ride with other people and share the experiences, right? As you were saying,
Sure,
making that easier for people.
And you've got a fairly substantial roadmap already in terms of things that you want to add into the app. I mean, I've been an app developer for a long time, or at least software developer for a long time, and I know that the list just keeps getting longer. Even once you've launched it, it just people want more and more stuff.
Exactly. It's a challenge, but I think that's it's really exciting. And some of the ideas, that are out there they're really cool. Just to kind of go back, say for example, when one of the new technologies are coming up, right? And how the wearables, for example, are changing. Like right now, if you are involved in any of these events that involve the live tracking and sharing, some of the feedback that we've gotten from people is like the devices and so on that they have to use are very clunky. Sometimes they break during the competition. So, it's expensive to get one piece for every single competitor, those kind of things. Ideally, by working on the data over time, and as people become much more accepting, which is we're seeing, people are becoming much sharing and comparing their stats more as we become more comfortable with the use of data in competitions. As the data becomes more reliable, I think the possibilities are really endless. And we can see that from other sports, Formula One, football. There's been a major, these sports have been able to very intelligently utilize technology to, as I was saying before, bring the action online and make these sports much more accessible and engaging to a wider audience.
Well, I guess there's just that always a segment of the fan base that just want to geek out on the stats, whether it's, the distance covered on a football field all the way through to, what the max heart rate of the grinder was on a SailGP boat. Once the data's there are a certain segment of the fan base who just want to geek out on the numbers.
Yeah. You also have, they have the in new wearables that are coming up, you have many of the next generation are going to be 5G, right?
Yeah.
And as those kind of networks go on, that's going to mean that's why I say further down the pipeline, we're interested in the race tracking and analysis and revisualization, because you'll have much more accuracy and much more potential to be able to do that without the need for these complicated additional devices. By using, and sometimes it's just the more sort of methodologies. So, for example, trying to implement like gamification in terms of the rankings and create your own challenges, those kind of things that keep people motivated and engaged and interacting with one another. These are also things that we want to continue working on to make the platform more fun to use. I think, looking back on Strava, they've done an excellent job in doing that for the running and cycling community.
I'm spending a lot of time looking at mixed reality and extended reality and these types of things at the moment, and I think that collision will be quite interesting. People, maybe sitting at home playing, sailing against someone who's sailing in real time out on the water, or if you can make that matching happen and make sure that obviously they won't feel hot or cold, or there's a certain amount of that simulation element, I guess, that's coming, of being able to almost race virtual versus real time. Maybe some of the sailors won't want to go full AR, but I can see that if you don't have to sort of always look down at your wrist, and you've got something in a sunglasses type configuration, then that could be quite interesting moving forward. I'm not sure how far away we are from that yet.
We'll definitely see. There's, as I said, we decided we wanted to focus more so on the software side of things, the data, and hopefully that, and so just focusing more so on additional integrations, so that we can hopefully make the platform compatible with these new technologies, whether it be like the glasses that come up. That sounds really cool. When we actually came up with the idea of Kanara was right just before we had to go into lockdown. And one of the first videos I remember seeing after a month in lockdown was a guy who had created a rig up in his garage with like a rope and his harness, and he was using his Oculus to like simulate kiteboarding during the lockdown in his there. And as we're saying, like that's a bit crazy and so on, but oftentimes we understand that not everywhere has, say, for example, left the pandemic. Outside of the pandemic, it's also just making these sports a bit more accessible to other people who may not be able to go out on the water,
Right,
for whatever
right.
circumstances that may be.
Although I did see a very, very cool full body haptic suit last week, which is being used in all sorts of different applications. The only downside of that is it's $15,000.
There you go. That's crazy, but I mean, right now we're trying to focus on there's lots of high tech solutions out there. If I was supposed to summarize our approach of doing it, is trying to bring a lot of these high tech concepts and practices that we already kind of see in the industry, but bring it down to the mass level, so that we can track and share and
even as you say, even at a club level, if you're doing sort of some basic training or coaching or things like that, if you can put that data that used to be only in the hands of America's Cup coaches in the hands of local club coaches, then that's pretty cool. And as the technology gets cheaper, it'll be easier and easier to do. So.
For a long time, we were feeling like we were getting told like this technology is very niche. You're looking at a very niche audience, and definitely recently we have these ideas, and it's really interesting that you worked in the motorsports before, so you already are aware of how other sports have been able to do this. And for some reason, despite sailing and water sports like windsurfing, kiteboarding, whichever, are very technical.
I think it's a different commercial ecosystem. So at the end of the day, a lot of motorsport is about selling cars, and water sport, especially sailing, is not necessarily about selling boats or sails. It's SailGP is not about selling F50s. It's about creating a television product, whereas Formula One is about Audi being able to say, or McLaren being able to say, our car's really quick, and therefore you should go and buy a McLaren. And so it does come down to the other thing. It comes down to is sponsorship activation, which in some parts of sailing is embraced, and in some parts of sailing is a dirty word, especially in the States. So in the US, if you talk about sponsorship and sailing in the same sentence, you get, it's a bad thing. Whereas in France, every Vendée Globe boat has a big sponsor on the sail, and it's just part of how the Vendée Globe works. And I think some of the more extreme side of things, whether it be kiting or whether it be paddleboarding, you've got, whether it be supplement companies or energy drink companies or more fashion sort of brands involved in those sports. It's a slightly different market, but as you say, you can probably activate some of those products. So there's obviously some really complementary technology for you guys, whether it be Garmin or whether it be some of the other wearable brands.
One of the ways we think of it is, say, for example, is because we think of it as just like the industry is just being really fragmented, right? And so you have even things like buying material and stuff. There are online shops, right? But most shops don't even have their stock online. People buy locally, but there are a number of brands such as Fly Surfer, Mistake, North that do sponsor quite a few events within the industry. But they're definitely at that local level.
I'm living in Greece at the moment. I didn't know what Mystic was until I came to Greece, and there's a massive windsurfer community and kite surfer community in Greece. I went down to one of these beach clubs and it had Mystic flags everywhere, and I'd never heard of them as a brand. I grew up with Gastra and Neil Pride and all of those guys.
Exactly. Like very much more for us. It's just more the dive brands more so, and O'Neill or Billabong. More the American. The brands are more popular in the States. Definitely a completely different ecosystem, and I'm wondering if it's just like there's so many players. We're very interested in exploring in terms of like how are we also able to try and use the platform to, as we grow a community, obviously, to start giving visibility to brands or sponsors within the sector.
Oh, that's super cool.
There's also, I think we associate these sports, sailing or kiting, windsurfing, surf, paddle. They're also with the lifestyle.
Definitely. Yeah. The same with sailing, whether it's a foiling moth sailor versus a 40-foot keelboat sailor or a laser sailor. Yeah. No, interesting stuff. It's getting a bit cold in Greece to do any paddling or anything at the moment, but I'll have to download the app and have a play.
Thank you so much again.
Well, thank you very much. And I think the audience will enjoy learning more about the app, and I'll put the link in the show notes as well so people can download it and have a play as well.
Thank you so much, David, and I hope you have a good rest of the day, and we'll speak soon.
If you want to keep in touch with what's going on in the yacht business, subscribe to the podcast and get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. If you get some value from the content, then you can subscribe via Patreon. Patreon subscribers get access to exclusive content and help to support its creation and production. You can subscribe via our website, yachtbusiness.biz, where you can also get in touch and give feedback about the show. The Yacht Business Podcast is produced by Pilote Media.